I'm going to take a look at staff accounts. Pardon my bad looking heading here. There's a question here. If you have a reference desk being used by many staff, should you have a generic login, such as ref with a password, or should each person log on individually when they're working the desks? Jennifer, that's a local decision. My recommendation is that everybody has their own distinct login, no matter the role. Now, I do recognize that in some cases that can be burdensome. I know of a library that uses a lot of work study personnel, and they are generally only at the circulation desk. They don't have the power to register patrons or things like that. They have a Circ 3 permission, and in that case they use a generic login. It really is a local decision. The thing though with having those distinct logins is that it holds each distinct employee responsible for what happens there. Should you have a separate login if you are a local admin in a Cat 1? You no longer have to have a separate login. You have an additional permission that is added to your account, but here is the caveat for that. We won't add a Cat 1 to a local administrator account. We'll add local administrator to a Cat 1 account to make sure that you have access to those things that you need to. And we'll talk about additional permission profiles as we go forward today. You did previously need to have separate logins, but you don't anymore. Staff may have multiple accounts to reflect the roles that they play in the library. There are two different things that we're going to talk about, and I had hoped to have this much clearer here. I know in past trainings it's very clear in my mind, and if we were having a conversation, be very clear, but on these slides, not necessarily. So staff there have the ability to have two things: a personal account and a work account. The personal account is either going to have a staff card or a resident profile assigned to it. All personal borrowing should be done on those accounts. The differentiation between staff card and resident profile is this: a staff card does not allow fines to be accrued. And this is, again, this is a local decision for your board and administration to determine if you want to extend this profile to your staff members. Do you want them to be able to borrow personal items and not have fines accrued on that? It's generally looked at as a benefit to employees. Or you can choose a resident profile, and that's going to give them full access to consortial borrowing, but if they don't return things in a timely manner, they are going to be assessed fines. This does become less meaningful if you are a fine-free library. Now, not meaningless, but less meaningful. I want to reiterate on this: all personal borrowing should be done on this account that they have. It should be done on their personal account. And then they will have a working account. There are Circ, CAT, and administrative profiles that may be assigned. Local admin and Cat 1 have to be assigned at the Evergreen, Indiana consortial level. So there are mechanisms either through the help desk or some other ways to have that done. All of the others may be assigned by the local administrator at the library. All business transactions should take place on these accounts. There are some staff that may have access to more than one such account. I specifically think of there may be staff who do cataloging and they're going to have a cataloging account, but then they may also do programming and they may need to check out a lot of materials for those programs. So they may actually have a card that they check that out and it would be designated in there. You're going to figure that out in your local library to determine what's appropriate. And if you have any questions, you can always contact us as well. Now, this goes back to this question here, should you have separate logins or separate accounts for different roles in the library? In a lot of cases, it just is going to mean that you're going to have an additional permission group that's added to an existing working account, but there are some exceptions to that. When assigning permissions or staff working account types, we go with the principle of least privilege. This is in order to minimize the liability for both the staff, so your employees, and the library. You should only grant the permission that's actually needed to do the job that they have. Giving more permission is going to, it may place that staff person in a position where they may be technically able to do something that they are not prepared or trained to do, or even really empowered by your local policies and things. And so it really works as a protection for them and for you. I'm going to go back out and change this as well so we can actually view what that says. My apologies for this. You can see all the behind the scenes. So in order to create this working account, it's no different than creating a patron account, and we will look in just a second at that interface, but some of the fields are entered differently. When you are establishing a new work account, you're going to use the short name for your library and then some type of alphabetic username, which you can determine in the barcode and the username field. And you can see the example here. Make sure that you are using a working profile rather than a patron profile. You're going to assign the primary branch of work. So if you have a multi-branch system, you'll determine what that branch of work is as the home library. And this is not necessarily the place where their office is. It really depends on the role of that person, who they are doing the work for, and how your library system, and this is kind of referring more to multi-branch systems, your library system is set up. So there are some libraries where this becomes a little what is the right word? It can be finicky. So there may be questions about this, and again, it's another thing that we will always help you if you have questions about that. You're not going to use their home address in this account. This is it needs to have their work phone number, their work email, the library's address. So it is not their personal information in here. For the date of birth, you can either select their hire date. That can be actually a good reference for that, or the date that the account was given to them. I did mention and I'm going to have this cleaned up, but I'm not going to go out and fix it right now, that you can add a secondary permission group. Now, it's not just secondary. You can actually add more than one here. In this case, this individual has whatever their initial permission group is, and then you can select from the drop down and then click add, and it will be reflected there. Let me go on to this next. I'm going to actually pop out and I'm going to open up an instance of this real quick because I want to show you what that looks like in the client. So I'm just going to actually go into my own account since I have nothing that's going to, I don't need all of those things. I'm kind of glad that I did that. Let's see if that actually brings up a result. No. Way too much information in this search form. Clear that form. Now I'm going to pop in here real quickly and we're going to go into edit. And I'm going to just open up this secondary group here. Now, you don't necessarily have access to all of these things, but you can see that I have additional permissions that have been added to my account. I'll also say I did not add those. I don't have the ability to increase my own permission level or add even a lateral kind of permission level to it. And that is something to keep in mind, that there may be individuals on your staff that they can add some permissions to other employees, but it's always going to be a lesser permission that they can add if they have the ability to even do that. So I'm going to pop back out of there and pop back into this. And while I'm here, I'm going to make this visible so that we can take a look at it. We're going to take a look at this in a minute, the actual interface for the special permissions. These are things that can be added on an ad hoc basis to a staff account. So rather than a permission group, which has a whole a whole package of permissions that are included, say for a Circ 1 would have the permission to create a patron account, have the ability to override some bills, those types of things. Now there are special permissions that you can go in and add them one at a time. In some cases, if they're available for that person and for you to add, you'll use the user permissions editor. It does allow you to also add additional working locations so that if you have a multi-branch system, you can add the other branches to an individual. And this is meaningful if you have centralized cataloging so that you can add working locations from all of your branches to that person with a Cat 2 or might be able to do with a Cat 1 once they have that permission assigned. Some of those may require you to authenticate as a local administrator as well. it's not going to remove the group permissions, so it doesn't overwrite those, it adds to them. As we look at these permissions, this statement here, be sure you review the permissions carefully to ensure you are granting only the special permissions required before you submit. So the permissions editor, and I'm going to pop out here, we're going to look real quickly into this user permission editor. I'm going to actually put my own in here. See if I remembered this correctly. So this is actually my personal user account. So this is not particularly meaningful other than to show you that based on how I am logged in, it's going to give you a list of available working locations. Now, because I am logged in as somebody with a global administrator, I see every one, but your list will be pared down based on your local administrator privilege. And then we get into the actual line-by-line permissions. Because this is a patron account, none of these are going to be checked. But as a working account, let me show the difference with that. Some of those may be checked based on the package of the group permission. I'm gonna get into this Circ2 here. That's probably a little bit more. You can also, when you're in here, access the user permission editor, not just through the administration page, but also the using the other drop down, and then it is here within the staff account. So you don't have to search for a name, and it will take a second to populate. You can see that my working location for this account is the consortium collection which we keep here at the State Library. Again, you wouldn't have all of those working locations to choose from. And then you can see that those things that are applied through my group permission are checked and then grayed out. So it's not something that we can change here, but those things that are unchecked and with the and have that activated, then you can select. The names of these permissions are not the most human readable type things. They're based on actual things within the database, and they're so that they're machine readable. Trend is so in this case, because they are because this account is a Circ2 rather than a Circ1, I do not have the ability to override some Circ permission things here, but it is grantable. I can grant it to this by ticking this, which I shouldn't be doing to my own thing, so I'm not going to. And then you also have the option to decide, can that person you're giving that permission to, can they grant it as well? So let's pop back to this and move on. This is probably, it depends on the library. This is often forgotten, and we try to encourage as often as possible for it to not be forgotten. What do you as a local administrator do when a staff person leaves? We're going to go through this little section right here, and then we're going to take a break just so you can anticipate that. But let's talk about what happens when a staff person leaves. If you have shared accounts, update the password on all of them. Update the password and expire the working account specific to that person. So where it says privilege privilege expiration date, you're going to change that date to the day that they left, and so that it expires. Do not delete or merge working accounts. We retain those as work history for reference, and because a lot of the transactions that are done by those accounts need that account active to be accurately reflected in the system. This is one of the main reasons that you need to have a separate personal account and a separate and work account for each staff person, because their personal borrowing, that needs to be able to go with them, but their work stuff needs to be able to be maintained in the ILS and be attached to all of the transactions, whether it was the creation of a BIP record or it was a forgiven bill for a patron. Those need to be retained. Then their personal account needs to be transitioned to the proper type that it would be if for them just as a non-library personnel. So should it be a resident card, a non-resident card, a reciprocal borrower? Then they need to be treated not as somebody who used to work at the library, but as a regular patron for that account. There have been in the past where they were allowed to keep their staff card designation because maybe they retired or something like that. Again, that's a local decision, but this is the policy, that they transition to the accurate personal account type.